Yes, I used to have to like point these in the pen.
Good evening. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Dr. Foley, roll call.
President Reese, members of the board, please let the record show that all members are present.
Thank you. We are going to have a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we are going to go ahead and move on to our agenda. I move that we approve our agenda as it's presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding the agenda? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries 5-0. We're going to go on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Foley.
President Reese, members of the board, we're going to begin tonight with our very favorite part of our meeting, which is where we get a chance to highlight, honor, and acknowledge our points of pride. So tonight we're going to start alphabetically. We have middle school in the house, and we're going to have Cooley Middle School come up, and we're going to honor our amazing students. We're going to honor amazing employees and our community members who make middle schools awesome in Higley. So we're going to start with Mr. Varner, Ms. DeVono, and Ms. Schwartz. If you'll come up and help us highlight our Cooley awesome points of pride.
Good evening, President Reese, members of the board, Dr. Foley, Cabinet. It is my pleasure tonight to be here to introduce some amazing individuals that are a part of Cooley Middle School and make Cooley the amazing family that we are. First of all, we have our Points of Pride volunteer. Our volunteer is Sonia Hernandez here. Did she make it? Sonia Hernandez, come on up. Sorry, Sonia, I didn't see you there earlier. Sonia is our point of contact with Desert Springs Church, which uses our facility on Sundays. On more than one occasion, she has provided a gift for our teachers, or multiple gifts for that matter, in appreciation for Desert Springs using our campus. This has taken a lot of time and effort on her part, which we greatly appreciate. Sonia, thank you for all that you do for the CMS community. We definitely appreciate you. Picture, right? Thank you again, Sonia. Our teacher points of pride, Sean Reynolds. Come on up. I saw him earlier. Although this is officially Mr. Reynolds' first year as a teacher, he has been a part of the Cooley family for several previous years as a substitute teacher and on 2 different stints as a long-term substitute teacher. He's embraced his role as an educator and is open to growing and learning professionally. His lessons are structured and organized, and more importantly, he takes time to build and maintain relationships with his students. We just had this conversation the other day in my office, didn't we, Mr. Reynolds? Mr. Reynolds can also be seen in the hallway between classes, monitoring students and directing traffic each and every day. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for all that you do.
So much.
We had a succulent for Mr. Reynolds. Not that he doesn't like flowers, but... Our classified points of pride, Wendy Maxwell. I saw you earlier. Come on up. Ms. Maxwell has been an integral part of the Cooley special education program for several years as a paraprofessional, and she has made such a positive impact at Cooley Middle School. She takes the time to build and maintain positive and supportive relationships with her students, and it is apparent that she absolutely loves what she does. This, of course, is seen by our students, thus helping to create an overall healthy, positive, and supportive classroom environment as they absolutely feed off of her smile. Thank you for all that you do for Cooley, Ms. Maxwell. And last, but most certainly not least, our student point of pride. Omar Kareem, come on up. We recognize Omar Kareem as our Cooley Cougar Point of Pride recipient because he is extremely hardworking, always focusing on his work and how he can improve. Omar has had to overcome many obstacles, and no matter how difficult the task, he is always up to do it. And he accomplishes everything with such a positive attitude. He treats his teachers, his peers, and the staff with the utmost respect, always treating others with kindness as well. Lastly, Omar is a leader by his actions. He shows others around him what it's like to have to overcome obstacles, and he does everything with great integrity. We are so lucky to have a student like Omar as a part of the Cougar family. Congratulations, Omar. We had a card and a gift card for Omar. We didn't know if he would want the flowers or a succulent. So I hope you enjoy that, Omar. Thank you very much. These are amazing individuals at Cooley.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Dolan up so that we can honor our Sossaman Points of Pride.
Thank you, Dr. Foley, Governing Board. Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really awesome that our district gives us the chance to recognize not just teachers, but all staff and people that work in our schools. It's just something that I think as a community we all should see some of the great things and the things that people are doing on our campuses. So I'm going to go through the two people first who unfortunately are not here. One I know just had an emergency. I don't know why my classified person is not here. I will share my two colleagues are actually working. Mr. Potts is doing a reentry plan for a student and with his parents, and Mr. Keeling we had some online kids do our science testing, so he's still there working with them, hoping they finish their tests. So first, she's not here, but our volunteer is AC Tremp. AC works with our PTSO, and what I would share with you about her is as we get along from elementary to middle to high, I think middle school, high school, they start leaning more on clubs than they do on parent groups. Yet at my school, we just have the most amazing parents that are willing to help. And when it comes to that, this year, even in the end of last year, our PTSO, certainly with AC, the things that they did for our teachers and staff was unbelievable. Shirts, hats, food, all things just to make them feel as special as they really are. So for AC, we at Sossaman, we truly appreciate her. Second is Alicia Riggers. Alicia is she's not our nurse, but that's what I call her all the time. She's a superwoman as our health aide. Prior to COVID, I would tell you she is very knowledgeable and she's very caring. She puts the kids first. After COVID, I would tell you she's knowledgeable, she's caring, and she puts the kids first. Nothing's changed for her. She has more on her plate, but she does the exact same things that she did prior. Just an unbelievable person. I'm not going to say willing to have, but she has to have sometimes those tough conversations with parents or teachers about, hey, whether you should be here or not here. We'd be lost without her. So Alicia Riggers. A student, Allison Ewing, come on up here. So Allison, I remember when you came as a 7th grader, this little girl, kind of a little giggly. And I remember because I knew your mom, and we were talking, and she asked me about the principal's leadership. And I said, yeah, I'm still going to have that. I think that would be something that, Allie would really like. And I remember when we did it last year, as a 7th grader, you put forth that effort of, hey, I have some ideas, I have some leadership. And I don't know if you remember, this is the book we read. We read the book called Eat That Frog. And in the book, the first time I said to you guys, I want you to pick a chapter, we're going to talk about it. And I might be wrong, but I think you talked about organization and procrastination. And from there, as we keep going into this year, I just have seen such a person grow. You're an amazing young lady. This year, we talked about what can we do. And if you remember, there's 2 things, right? One thing is for some girls in the bathroom, and the other is the bathroom, but some pictures. And we will get those things done, and none of that stuff would have come up if it wasn't for you. So I cannot wait to see what happens for you going on forward into high school. Thank you. I cheated. Your mom said you like M&Ms. Last would be my teacher, Haley Roner. Come on up here. I'll see if I can embarrass you. So maybe 5 years ago, you were a student teacher. She went from student teacher, then she started to teach science on our campus. And from the minute she started to now, kids first. That's just the way Haley approaches her classroom and anything she does. She took on an additional role over the last 2 or 3 years as a student council sponsor. And I think this year has probably been very, very difficult. I don't know how many times we've had a conversation. Hey, what do you think about this? Yeah, we can't do that. What do you think about this? I'll check, but I don't think we can do that. But through it all, you've just been flexible. And again, making these kids still accountable, doing things with the kids. Making student council still something that's meaningful on our campus. So because of what you do in our classroom, because of who you are, because of all the things you've been flexible with, I appreciate you so much. That's for you. Enjoy something with your husband.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Thank you. So thank you to our Points of Pride recipients, our family and their friends who came tonight. We always let you know at this point in the meeting, you are so welcome to stay, but we also know you've got to get ready for school. So if you need to leave, we also say feel free to do so at this time as well. And thank you for coming to join us tonight. Okay. Okay, I will continue with our superintendent's report. President Reese, members of the board, you can see that we have a list of upcoming events. And normally this time of year we say, oh, and here come the 90 days of May. And I'll tell you what, we embrace the 90 days of May a little bit differently this year than we did. We have a new appreciation for it because last year we couldn't do these things. And so as our calendars begin to fill, we have a new value for the ability to get together, honor, and celebrate, although our calendars are beginning to fill. So upcoming events. Obviously, this weekend we have a governing board retreat here for our governing board and cabinet, where we'll be talking about upcoming strategic planning and all kinds of initiatives and those kinds of things. So that is this Saturday. For the month of April, we have another meeting scheduled, a regular board meeting scheduled. You'll see in May, we begin with honoring and celebrating. We'll begin with our Teacher of the Year breakfast, which will be different than we've celebrated, but we're excited to be celebrating a very elegant event to celebrate our Teachers of the Year in the Higley School District because we are so fortunate to have such amazing teachers. We also originally scheduled, on our regular calendar, we had a meeting on May 12th. This is going to be kind of a modified meeting. It's going to start earlier on that day. It's going to be we have to officially do a public hearing for our budget, and we have to do it before the 15th. So we're going to have a quick meeting because on that night we also have awards nights and other things. In addition, though, we needed to add a board meeting as we dive deep tonight. We start beginning of a bond study. We're going to be learning some more information and gathering more information, and this gives time from our April meetings to our our May meetings to have additional information. So May 19th will be our governing board meeting where we continue our deep dive into bond conversations. So these are some big upcoming events, meetings, and the beginning of a busy month. And of course, this does not encompass all of the events and other things that are coming on our calendars, which we'll talk more about at our retreat this weekend. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you. All right, we will go on to board comments. Any board comments? Okay. We'll go on to request to speak. Mrs. Reach, any requests? Moving right along. We will now go to our consent agenda, and I move that we approve our consent agenda as it's presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding our consent? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0.
President Reese, members of the board, I just wanted to take a second to just do a couple acknowledgements with the consent agenda tonight. We recognize the talents of a few of our amazing employees who just confirmed appointments. So we want to congratulate Curtis Carabin, who has been placed into the role of the multimedia specialist. Want to acknowledge Mr. Tyler Moore, who has just been named as the CFO for the next school year, and Kristen Nash, who's currently been named as our Assistant Director of Special Education. In addition, we want to highlight that for this next year, you've confirmed the interim Associate Superintendent position to be Ms. Sherry Richards. And our interim executive director for elementary ed will be Dr. Sue Borzich. So we are excited about the highlighting of our skills and abilities of our internal people in some new roles and potential and positions for us in the district next year. So thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to see the progress continue to move forward, and thank you. All right. With that, we'll go on to our information items for our fiscal year 21 monthly governing board finance report for our M&O for February. Does anyone have any questions? No? Well, all right, thank you. Then we will go on to 7.2, which is our 2022 legislative report. Mr. Gadd?
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. This report that you find in your packet highlights those pieces of legislation they're selected that I thought were significant enough to present this evening. Yeah, and they're up on the screen now, so it's good. The first one is School Facilities Board is moving under the Department of Administration. That is a significant change for them. Will be a significant change for them, I'm sure. And I don't know how to predict whether that will be good or bad for school districts, but we'll find out. The reason that this legislation was proposed last year and this year I think is probably going to make it, is that they didn't feel that the School Facilities Board was as efficient in allocating the funds, that kind of stuff. And so we're going to let the governor's office basically deal with that. So we'll see how that comes out. This one, 1139, is significant. It's been signed by the governor. It takes all three sections of Proposition 301. You may remember there's a base pay, a performance pay, and a menu. It now combines all of them together into one fund, which will make it a heck of a lot easier for us to administer and give you more flexibility as to how you allocate those funds. You won't be in those defined boxes any longer. There are some stipulations in that legislation, especially relative to performance pay. So we'll be furnishing you additional information as we get that bill back from the governor's office. It basically says in general that you have to spend the money on teacher comp and student support services, very broad. Much, much broader than it was before, and much less defined into individual boxes in terms of what your limit is. So I think you'll enjoy a lot more flexibility with that. Senate Bill 1165. That one is a reaction, of course, to COVID, in that the state did not feel that you can conduct a reasonable or adequate teacher evaluation for the current school year, given everything that's occurred. So it's a one-year reprieve from doing an evaluation because of the circumstances. Senate Bill 1433. That is one that you probably have heard about. It's to fund that portion of the year that the district might have spent in virtual learning and count its time the same as it would be if it were in person. It's got an emergency clause, which would obviously make it effective at the end of this year so that you could take advantage of that additional 5% funding. We'll let you know as it progresses. I'm not terribly optimistic about that one because it does not have support from the governor's office and the cost is in excess of $200 million. So that's just where that one is, and I knew you would probably be interested in that one especially. The next one, Senate Bill 1683, is in appropriations. It enhances open enrollment. It establishes a $10 million fund for parents to apply for transportation assistance at the state level. So it is another incentive, another opportunity for parents in school choice. Not surprising given the history of the legislature. And then I thought we would cover the next slide, which is some budget highlights. The governor's budget has in it a $500 grant for free and reduced lunch to mitigate severe learning loss. So you find that not only are all of the COVID funds kind of are oriented that direction, which is free and reduced lunch, but the governor is pushing for some of his funding. I'm sure some of it is grant or in origin, federal in origin, but it's to mitigate that severe learning loss. So there's lots of different funding sources out there that you will find, including COVID 1, 2, and 3, and now the governor's budget and so forth. So all of that is focused on, it seems primarily focused on free and reduced lunch. The next one is the Senate School Facilities Board receives $119 million for the year to allocate to districts, and obviously we hope that we're a part of getting some of that money. The restoration of capital, you may remember that was previously reduced, is now being restored for next year, and that's the budget we presented to you, was the restoration version. That's $68 million that the state will now bring back into the funding picture to adequately, well, I shouldn't say adequately, to fully fund the original formula for capital outlay. And there is a huge rollover, $900 million worth, at the state level of funding back during the recession time that was not allocated to districts until the following fiscal year. So that rollover is a debt that they have created by basically paying you the year following what you've earned it. So they're going to restore that in pieces, and the first down payment in his budget is $30 million. There's also a miscellaneous list, 10 or so different things that he's proposing to spend money on to complete the $250 million allocation. And then inflation and enrollment growth and miscellaneous is 105. The state has to allocate as those formula funds grow because of enrollment growth, ADM growth. They allocate typically 50% of the money, and the other 50% is coming from property tax. So it's an ongoing annual obligation the state has every year based upon the estimated growth in students statewide. So that's the governor's version. It totals some $700 million. It's significant in that he's interested in allocating free and reduced lunch. That's a first, I think, for him, but that seems to be what the focus is. Senate budget highlights. Some of the same things. They're spending $67 million to restore capital. The same bill that you saw earlier in bill form is now in the budget for restoration of reduced funding because of distance learning. The School Facilities Board for $108 million. That's somewhat close to the governor's $119, and then some miscellaneous funds. So I think it's safe to summarize this into there's not going to be probably in the end a whole lot of funding for education. I mean, these are the major pieces of legislation. These are the major sections of each of the Senate and the governor's budget. They're focused primarily on continuing the current funding structure. They are not likely going to be focused on restoration of any funding for virtual learning. That's going to be up to the districts and COVID and other things in order to figure out how that works. And I'm happy to see the School Facilities Board, at least they've got a piece of it, but it will be a significant change, I believe, in terms of where they're reporting to. So that whole application process, where the priorities are, what gets approved, is now much different. It's going to be very much controlled by the state now. And then if the board has any questions on any of these, I'll be happy to try to answer them. We will furnish to you at the end of the session, which is probably the middle of May, would be my guess, because there's not anything significant there to hold them any longer. We'll give you a final report.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gadd? Thank you for covering that. All right, we are now going to go on to 7.3, which is our third review of the 2021-2022 capital outlay budget. I believe that's going to be Mr. Moore.
Yep. Good evening, President Reese, members of the board. This is our third presentation of the capital outlay budget. Much like we did with the M&O budget, we're bringing this in information, and then later in the agenda, we're going to request for tentative approval of the capital budget. Turn this on. There we go. So the highlights, again, nothing has changed here. Like Mr. Gadd just mentioned in the legislative update, the governor and the Senate have both projecting a fully restored district additional assistance, and that is going to bring us back to restored to pre-recession numbers. So this is back 08, 09 numbers, funding numbers. So again, still inadequate for districts and on an annual basis, but we'll take whatever we can get. Second bullet here, we have a designated funding source next year for a curriculum adoption. And I believe as the year moves on, Dr. Foley and her team will bring some more information on how that process is going and what adoption we'll be presenting. The third bullet here, a lot of this budget is based on our high budget balance carry forward that we've been carrying as a district. As it notes here, we are bringing over roughly a $16 million budget balance carry forward. For reference, our annual allocation in capital is $6 million, so it's relatively high for a district this size. So this budget does bring that budget balance down to about $8.6 million, which we still feel is healthy and conservative in terms of a capital budget, and it leaves us room for the next few years to fund various items that we will present tonight. The fourth bullet there, we have some allocations to complete the 1-to-1 student-to-device ratio. This is a technology initiative that has been ongoing, and we hope to complete that next year with this capital budget. We've talked about in the M&O budget, the reduction from the M&O transfer to capital. So that is funding. We've been utilizing our M&O budget to fund our lease payment. Our annual lease obligation is $4.4 million. We are projecting to move some of that obligation to the capital budget. So the difference there would be $1.5 million be funded from the capital budget next year, and then still transfer 2.9 from the M&O budget. We have a allocation in here that decentralizes some of the FF&E requirements that or obligations that the district has historically purchased for schools, and move some of that budget down to the school level. I've indirectly talked to a few principals, and a lot of them are excited and can't wait for next year to get this underway. And then lastly, we will continue to pursue any SFB funding and E-rate funding. Those are additional grant funds and other federal governmental grants that are available to us based on applications and certain capital needs. So we'll continue to pursue those, but we are not projecting those into this budget. So any grant funding we receive will be a benefit to the district in terms of budget balance, which will benefit us in the the next fiscal year. So nothing has changed on our summary here. I'll touch on a few of the highlights of the big dollar amounts. So on the first line there, we have the district-wide usage. We previously mentioned the adjacent ways funding, and that we do have some approval to move forward with spending some of that money down and not holding that as a budget set aside. So that is positive news. We have an unallocated amount of $1.5 million. This is set aside for those emergencies, those unknowns that come up during the year, and this amount here will hopefully fund those. And we don't anticipate any emergencies always, but we do have it set aside. You'll see the annual building lease payment. Again, that's a $4.4 million obligation. Mr. Gadd will later expand on some plans that we do to reduce that out of our capital budget. But right now, our obligation annually is $4.4 million. I mentioned the classroom technology. That 1-to-1 device ratio cost is going to be roughly $1.7 million. I believe there's 3 schools left to fulfill that need. We have an annual technology budget of $729,000. These are our annual renewals, our software, Microsoft, our emails, our financial software, etc. We have a major maintenance plan. This is going to be an annual obligation from the capital budget of roughly $1.7 million. Again, these are our annual costs to the district. The capital needs, AC, repair HVAC, water heaters, etc. Those are annual costs that the district incurs every year, and this is that budget for that. Major projects, we have set aside both $1.5 million out of the capital budget and $1.5 million out of the current bond for future or projected enrollment growth or projected classroom increases or wherever we may need those funds next fiscal year. $3 million should be an adequate amount to address any needs that may incur next year. We don't know where those may be right now, but we have that set aside. As I mentioned with the FF&E, we're allocating $40 per student to decentralize the roughly $492,000 capital budget down to the school level. This is, like I mentioned, a breath of fresh air for school principals, and even athletic directors are going to get a portion of this. So they're very excited to have an allocation at their school level. And of course, with direction with the finance department and purchasing, we'll give them some money to purchase some of their capital needs for next year. As we move down the list, the warehouse has a small allocation for a forklift, a new forklift they need for efficiency uses. In the warehouse, they have a 14 or 15-year-old forklift. So it's a little outdated. And Juan and his team are managing, but we have a plan now to kind of replace some of those outdated equipment needs. And there's also an old copier in the print shop that we are going to be replacing to help support our schools with some of their larger print shop jobs going forward. We have a transportation budget, roughly $40,000 for equipment upkeep. This is an annual small equipment budget they would utilize to keep their vehicles up to speed. You'll notice out of the bond, we have $350,000 set aside. This is in the bond, current bond, and I believe this is purchasing 2 buses next year. Of course, we'll bring those back to you under consent once we get a quote and a plan for this. You also see a small allocation for White Fleet. I don't know if you've seen our White Fleet driving around, but it is aging as well. So we are addressing those needs with this allocation, and we anticipate this being an annual allocation. Educational services, again, we are decentralizing a lot of our capital budget with some oversight from our department heads. So we are having a library budget to replace some of those outdated library books. Even this budget can be used for instructional software, so a lot of our districts are one-to-one. So there may be online needs in terms of online texts or instructional software that the libraries can utilize with those devices. So this budget is for that purpose. We have a $100,000 budget for musical instrument replacement. As we mentioned, seems like the theme is a lot of our equipment is outdated and aging. So the plan of this budget is really to address those needs. So I know that budget will go a long way, and it's not sufficient. But we hope this to be an annual allocation to bring our equipment up to speed. As I mentioned, there's an athletic equipment budget. Again, that will be decentralized to the middle and high schools who have those athletic sports teams. They have a little higher need in terms of equipment, upkeep, athletic equipment, athletic uniforms, et cetera. Like I mentioned in the highlights, there's a budget for curriculum and textbook adoption. We set aside $2.9 million. While we're still working on a plan for that, this budget can be rolled over year after year to address whether we do a phased approach, a K through 5, an elementary or a middle through high. The budget, is sufficient, or we can roll it over next year to address those needs. So, the Higley Online Academy, we're estimating around $55,000, a lot lower than what our current subscription is. Again, that's based on student base and kind of estimated roughly what our enrollment will be for the Higley Online Academy. That will fluctuate once we find out some enrollment numbers, but we do have a set aside there for that software that we plan on utilizing for HVA. Lastly, you'll see the carry forward of $8.6 million. That's roughly 1.5 times our annual allocation. So you'll notice we're bringing our overall capital budget down a little, but we are still maintaining a healthy budget balance going forward into 22-23. Again, this capital plan here is a very safe, kind of structured budget. We are addressing a lot of the needs that the district has, but we are, again, maintaining a budget balance carry forward for future needs in 22-23. And that is all I have. Is there any questions on this capital budget for next year?
President Reese.
Mrs. Wilson?
I just want to thank you. Everything on page 11 is so meaningful for our students to have the $10 for library books and per student in the fine arts and the athletic departments at the middle and high school. I just think those are so important, and to see those in our budget is so nice to see. And I think I said it before, but I'm just really excited that our librarians will see maybe a little wiggle room in their budgets, not relying so much on Scholastic. And so I just want to thank you for making sure that they're really well taken care of.
Any other questions for Mr. Moore? I think you guys cover it pretty thoroughly, so. And that we've seen it a few times, which is definitely helpful. All right, well, thank you. Then we will go on to our 7.4 bond study.
So President Reese, members of the board, before Mr. Gadd starts on this, we have been on a financial journey together since October. I believe we put together a calendar, and we've been coming almost every meeting. I think by the time we hit June, each of you you could be resident experts and teach board members a thing or two about all kinds of funds, from M&O to capital to bond. We have become well immersed in that. And so, as you know, at our last meeting, we tentatively approved our M&O budget. Tonight, one of the action items after our third review is to tentatively approve the capital budget, which are our budget-controlled funds. But along that line, we now move into another category, which is bond and how we use that in our planning. As you know, since October, we've also been on a journey where we've been learning about, so where are we and where are we going? What are our needs as far as growth and our students and our facilities, and where do we have space, and what are our major projects and needs, so that when we make decisions, we are informed with all information to help us with those decisions. So tonight, as we continue our journey on budget and deep dive, this is bond study start, which we'll continue to build on each time, just like we've done with everything else. And we'll learn more through Mr. Gadd with our bond study, so I will let him begin.
Madam President, Members of the Board, thank you, Dr. Foley. This will take a little time, I think. So hopefully I'll keep your attention and we'll move ahead. And if you if you need to ask some questions, feel free. Let me start out by saying, bonds, especially a bond as significant as this one, requires a lot of planning, and we've hopefully injected a lot of planning. You can see that in the capital budget you just saw. And you see it in M&O, and now you're going to see it in bond. We're trying to put together the best planning process we know of, where we allocate the resources to the best of our ability in the right places. And that's what this bond is intending to do. It is a study packet for a possible bond election that you would be asked to call on June 9th. That is up to you. That would be in the form of a resolution, creating a ballot question in November. And the dollar amount, we have some flexibility there. We are recommending a $95 million bond amount that has the kind of detail in it that you can see here. The duration is 5 years. It could go a bit longer, but that's the expenditure plan. It could last 6, could last 7. But when you get to the end of that process, if you need to continue, and you probably will, some of these expenditures, then that would be the time frame in which you would look at another bond and decide if that's what you want to do at that point. So that's kind of the the process that you would have. So let's begin by taking a look at page 2 of the packet. Sometimes you get confused about, I don't quite understand what relationships there are of different funds. And if you think about what number 2 does, it's got three major sections, really. The first one is M&O. That's your day-to-day operations. That will be all your salaries and benefits, and you guys know that. You've been there. Number 2 is the budget that Mr. Moore just presented to you. It tends to be short-term, one-year capital needs, funded by a formula, just like M&O is. So, as long as your needs don't exceed that short-term process, and it's 1 year at a time, and you don't have really any major expenditures that are going to exceed the amount that's allocated to the formula, fine. Most districts eventually get to the point where they have some major needs, technology, et cetera, and I have to have more funds in which to implement those plans in order to stay competitive with market changes and competitive with other districts, especially in the choice environment that we have now. There's lots of things in here that would benefit the district in a number of ways, not the least of which, of course, would be our students need to have what's necessary to be successful. And that leads us then to what kinds of expenditures, plans do we have for major multi-year projects, and that's what this bond is. So it's a supplement, it's an add-on to the short-term needs that you saw earlier. And it's a 5-year plan, basically a 5-year capital plan that's funded through bonds, sale of bonds. Page 3 is what are the reasons for a bond? Well, as you know, very well know, that the state has reduced in the past annual capital funding, that's the restoration subject we just talked about, for a number of years. The formula has been reduced by the state because they needed money to balance their budget, and it comes from that '08 recessionary period, and has now finally, over a long period of time, been restored. But that meant that districts were denied that capital money over lots of years. So you tend to fall back in whatever plan you might have had. Emphasis on technology is, as you well know, very, very high. And that consumes a lot of capital money to stay up with internet speeds and technology and devices and all kinds of things. So the funded technology plan, in my opinion, probably requires at some point that the district establish a fairly large budget in which to deal with the hardware and software of technology. I don't know how else you keep up without doing that. Energy conservation is there, should be, and is in this plan. So is safety and security in this plan. The district has some older buildings that, you don't think of it sometimes that way, but some of the schools are older than you might think, and so they're going to need some major maintenance. It does eliminate the reliance on M&O for capital. So it allows more money to stay in M&O, as it should, and you can enhance your instructional programming that way. It also provides, eliminates the reliance of short-term capital to try to satisfy long-term needs. You have a budget that Mr. Moore presented to you, and instead of exhausting it with trying to meet some of these needs, and it doesn't really actually do it because it doesn't have enough money in it, you eliminate that issue. You eliminate all of that because you now have another funding source to deal with those major kinds of projects. And this one happens to contain a possible outright purchase of one of the 2 schools that we have under lease agreement. That is a significant portion of the debt service the district has obligated itself to. By pursuing the purchase of one of those 2 schools, they're both basically priced in the same way. We expect to save the taxpayers $21 million. It does require $32 million, as you will see, within this packet to do that. But there is a significant offset to that with the taxpayer savings the district would be spending for interest. So this lease, as you well know, also runs out into 2052. It's an extremely long period of time. And so it probably needs to be dealt with as soon as you can with some more realistic approach as to how you get to ownership for those 2 schools. So each of the 2 schools, if you tried to purchase them currently, are about $32 million each in which to pay off the outstanding payment obligations that you have. That's the principal amount. It currently is containing another $21 million of interest on each school of that side. So there's a total of $53 million that's being paid from your debt service tax rate for each school over time to satisfy those lease requirements. So the savings would be coming from interest on one school. Simply the interest would obviously be canceled. We would generate an amount of money through the bond that would satisfy the remaining principal amount. And we've tried to put it in here in a way that it doesn't cancel out lots of the other things that we should address in a bond for district needs. It's about 1/3 of the total of what's projected in here. So it's a start. It's going to take a while. If you decide to approve this proposal, it's going to take a while for the district to get bonding capacity in which to try to deal with the second school. But at least, we could push ahead, maybe even get an agreement where the second school at some future date would have a buyout amount, and we can negotiate that potentially. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, some other budget highlights on slide 4. As I mentioned earlier, it's got technology, it's got building safety, it's got security. It's also got a section for major construction. You may recall the demographic study that Mr. Bramer presented to the district. It does have some enrollment growth in it at selected locations, particularly high schools emphasized. And so if classrooms are needed over the next 5 years, whatever renovations might be required, it's got a significant allocation in here to make that happen. And that's just, I think, we need to pursue always having adequate facilities for whatever number of students that we have, and this would satisfy that. And as you know, that environment is somewhat unpredictable because of school choice, et cetera. But if we do need additional classrooms, the money is here in which to do that. Major maintenance, that's a significant item. The capital budget that you saw had some maintenance money in it. It's not enough. It needs to be more because we have 1.7 million square feet under roof. So it's a lot of facilities. We need to be more aggressive with painting, with air conditioning replacement, with kinds of things that people would expect normally for us to do, especially those folks who have voted for a bond in the past and would think that you would maintain whatever they invested their money in. So that's what this plan does. I will add that both the major construction projects and the major maintenance, Dr. Fowler will be making an in-depth presentation to you at the April 21st meeting. So I won't spend a lot of time there, but he'll be going over that in some detail. It shifts the lease payments that we currently have for the 2 schools totally to bond. So it not only eliminates the transfer of money for the 1 school that would not be purchased from M&O, but then eliminates it again from the capital budget of which we've moved money to. So the end result of all of that is there are no other contributory budgets that would be sacrificing their budget capacity by paying for another lease. It's all going to be in bond. And that will give us more operational money every year, give us more short-term capital money every year to do what those budgets are intended to do. And I say that strongly, intended to do, rather than make sizable lease payments. Okay, possible then purchase of 1 middle school is contained in the proposal. On slide number 5, it also provides for a potential land purchase, a site purchase. This may not be necessary, but if it is, from my view of what I've seen in the district, if you're going to have the flexibility of having a site, a second site, to build a school on, the vacant land that I see is quickly being consumed. You're going to have to do something with moving ahead on that subject, or there won't be any subject to move ahead on. It will be that we need to reboundary, that we need to add classrooms, maybe create schools that are larger than we would like, because there's no real viable option to do anything else. The current site the district owns, you will see, especially on the 21st, that it's not located ideally. It's in a spot that potentially it may serve a better purpose by doing something other than being a future school site. but it is there, and it is usable. It's got a lot of commercial and freeway activity right around it. It's not as ideal as a neighborhood school would be. And so the intention here would be, if we pursue this, that the district would be able to find a site that might be more suitable for a school, and then you could use that existing site for whatever other purpose you would want. It could create a second school site if you needed it. And the shortcomings that we see, I've talked to Dr. Fowler about this several times, is we don't have a lot of school capacity in the northern part of the district, north of Pecos. And that's where the projected growth is at. So this would help with that whole subject. And in my opinion, if we don't pursue it now, it's probably not going to be a very viable option in the future because you just can't find it. We pay no taxes on it. We could turn around if it were, let's say, currently farmland, and lease it back to the farmer and get some revenue from it. So it's really the outright purchase amount, and then you can get some revenue from it, and you know in the future, if you do need it, it's there for you to build on.
Mr. Gadd, there's a new development going down south of Queen Creek and Sossaman area. Is there a school site? Do we know the school site in that area? It's Legato. It's a brand new development, Dr. Fowler. I was told there's a school site there, but I just have always wondered, I know this is kind of a little bit off topic, but is there a site there still?
President Reese, Vice President Kaler. I'm sorry, Board Member Kaler, sorry, but Vice President Wilson. I didn't get my program before the thing, but no, it is true that Legato is the subdivision, and way back many years ago, I think before the downturn, there was discussion with the district and Legato about setting land aside for the district to purchase. The district had an option to purchase land there. The district has not acted on that at all. It's, again, per Mr. Gadd's conversation, it's not a location right now really where we need a school. So that's also part of the challenge when we've looked at the demographic study and the work that Mr. Bramer had presented prior to COVID, and then he's done some work since then. We just really have to look out the window right here and we can see this is where all the growth is. It's happening right where we are. And so that's why I think the site at Legato, there still may be land there, but that's not something that at this point the district's been pursuing.
And I just didn't want another kind of school to go in that spot, I guess. Okay, thank you. That answered my question.
Thank you. I can't emphasize enough here that if you want that flexibility, I think it's important to pursue it as soon as possible, or you won't have that option to pursue because something will be built on it, and that will be the end of that. So if you're going to do it, now is the time to do it. Okay, we are proposing with this $95 million bond, 75% of the current district's remaining bonding capacity. Bonding capacity, there is a formula that limits how much debt you can issue. And this would take us up to 75% of the remaining amount. There still would be some $30 million of remaining capacity to add to the capacity that you will generate over time annually through the formula. As the district grows with property values, including building, the capacity of the district to bond grows with it. So over the next 5 or 6 years, there should be enough growth that you would be in a position to have another bond, and could be in the magnitude of what we are talking about here. But in the meantime, that's not going to be likely just because of the cost of bonds and because the available capacity needs to rebuild itself if you actually do this proposal here. The tax implication is pretty minor. We currently have a tax rate of $7.28 total per $100 of assessed value. This bond is projected to add 14 cents to that. So it's very minimal when you think of a $7 rate and you're adding 14 cents. Not a major concern, I would not think. And the next bond, Mr. Moore and I have talked about this a couple of times, because the debt service that the district will be doing over time will start to decline. You will be paying off debt, and the tax rate will be going down according to that. So when you start into that significant decline, you want to think about, do I allow the tax rate to decline and then later on all of a sudden increase it because I need another bond? So as it declines, you might want to consider that's the point in time where I have another bond so it stays flat. The taxpayers can predict what their tax bill is because it doesn't change. And you get the advantage of having that monies then in that second bond. And Mr. Moore and I have talked about 28, 29, somewhere maybe in the 30, but I mean right in there is where we think that you would have enough bonding capacity comparable to this to move ahead. And that might be where you deal with the second lease. So that's a possibility. Okay, slide number 6 are some definitions that you'll see later on. So the technology, safety, and security. The technology, of course, you'll see the details of that plan. Basically, device one-to-one, refreshing existing computers, all of those things that you would expect to do to keep up with those kinds of technology standards. And there's some attention to district safety and security, especially it does have in it a significant number of new cameras. So that would help, with that subject. Transportation, it has over the 5-year period a pretty aggressive replacement schedule for buses and light fleet. Yeah, you should be in relatively good shape if we're able to follow this schedule. It basically retires district buses at somewhere in the 12-year age range. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good schedule for most people. And support vehicles, we have a standard of 10 years, 100,000 miles, and it meets that standard. So you're replacing roughly 4 or 5 buses a year, and the same number of support vehicles for the next 5 years. That's contained within the bond. The lease payments I have talked about.
Mr. Gadd,
I will simply mention there that, I'm sorry.
what is the normal life of a bus? Do
The
you know?
life of a bus.
Yeah, like you said, it was a 12-year
Yeah.
turnaround on a bus.
I think-
That might be somebody else's question.
I
but-
think 20 to 25 years
Okay,
for parts.
Okay.
After that, the difficulty is not so much that the bus is worn out, it's you can't get
get
parts for it.
Okay, I was just wondering, because I wasn't for sure, I'm not schooled in that area, so I wasn't sure how that would,
Sure.
what the normal life capacity of that is. Thank you.
Okay, we talked about lease, and that will be the subject of an executive session that we're scheduling for April 21st, because it's got significant real estate implications, and we need to talk about those. And then land purchase, already talked about in detail in the northern part of the district. Major maintenance, Dr. Fowler, along with major projects, will give you an in-depth review of those, and then we have a contingency that's contained in the packet. Moving on to slide number 7. This is categorically how we would recommend spending the entire bond amount over the 5-year period. And you see down the left-hand side some major headings that gets you kind of oriented to what the total is. And then on the far right-hand side, you see a percentage, and those percentage amounts are the amount that each of these major categories occupies of the total. So if you go down that right-hand side, 16% of it is technology, 33% of it are the leases we talked about, 28% is major projects, 11% is maintenance, so it gives you some idea of how much goes to each one of those purposes. And it's pretty basic. I mean, it goes to those things that you would expect it to go to, that are long-term, multi-year capital needs for the district. I don't think we've left anything out of the list. And then we've just flattened that expenditure plan across the 5 years. We are also containing the contingency, and so this would be the plan that we would propose to you over the next 5 years. Slide 8 is the technology plan in detail. There's a part 1 and a part 2. There's $15.5 million over the 5 years. There's about $1.8 million annually of that 15.5, and there's about $3 million thereabouts each year for part 2. Part 1 tends to be more of a long-term maintenance, maintenance type budget for technology, maintaining the internet structure, buying printers, teacher laptops, projectors, servers, those things that need to be replaced or added to over time. And part 2 is a straight refreshment, replacement of student use computers, maintaining the 1-to-1 ratio so that the students have the latest technology that you generally would expect them to have, and it's guaranteed over a 5-year period. Okay, looks like transportation. As I mentioned earlier, this is one where it assures you that that bus fleet will stay current, and it assures you that there will be some attention paid to white fleet vans, trucks that we have out there that we do need to maintain and make sure they're safe. We have a lot of student use of some of those vans, as you know, especially at high schools. So it's important that we keep those vehicles in some sort of shape, and that means we need to have a replacement schedule. So this is 4 to 5 each of those types of equipment over the next 5, 4 to 5 full-size buses, 4 to 5 vans, trucks, whatever that mix turns out to be. The replacement standard is at the bottom, and that's where basically the yellow feet every 20 years or 250,000 miles. I don't think we have to worry about 250,000 miles, but if you wouldn't ever want, I wouldn't think the fleet to go past, or any individual bus within the fleet to go past 20 years. It just is too long for adequate maintenance. And then we put a limit on white fleet that those are not more than 10 years old. Okay, the next slide is the lease. There are 2 schools, Cooley and Schlesselman, that have this long-term lease. Each payment, each year's payment is 4.4 for both of them. That's contained then in this capital budget, or one of those lease schedules, 11 million, would be taken and added to the lease schedule. Would take the 22 million and add 10 to it from the total, and that would be applied then to that purchase of one school for 32 million as a set aside. So this removes the lease payments from capital, transfers those to bond. There's an annualized amount then for continuing lease inside bond. If one middle school is purchased, the district would save an estimated $21.7 million in interest savings through discontinuing one of the 2 leases. And if the purchase did not occur for whatever reason, then the 10 million that you see up above would be reassigned to other capital needs. We would retain the 22 million in order to continue the current lease payment schedule.
Mr. Gadd, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, and if you don't know, I get it. Because just as we were going through this, essentially what I'm looking at is right now, if it were to play out for our lease for one school, we're looking at $53 million-ish.
Yeah.
I don't recall what, and I know you have a vast of experience, so what would typically a school of that nature cost? Do you know?
Well, I can guess it. I can speculate. Usually my guesses are not too far off. This was done in 2013. So if you think back to what the prices would be in 2013, I would guess we're talking $200 a square foot. These are middle schools. We're probably in the neighborhood of 90 to 100,000 square feet. Dr. Fowler, something like that? How much? 120, okay, so 120 times 200, whatever that would be. I'd bring my calculator, but that sounds like around, I would suspicion around 20 to 25 million.
120,000 square feet times 200 square foot.
And I'm high with the 200. That's 24 million. And I'm high with the 200, so you probably could have built either one for $20 million. Now
And this 32 million right now isn't even talking about what we have paid
Right,
up to this point.
right.
So
I mean,
significantly
yeah,
overpaid.
yeah.
Okay.
What would have cost you 20 million on an outright now is way 60, 70 million dollars. If you took out the current lease schedule all the way to 2052 and you included principal and interest, those schools are costing you 3 times of what you would have paid on an outright purchase basis.
So what it would cost us to run the whole lease and what, even more, we could have had 2,
Yeah,
we would have paid for 2 on its own, ours,
yeah.
saved our taxpayers a
Yeah.
ton of money.
Yeah, I really think that it should be important for the district to look at the long term here and try to save money wherever you can. I mean, the decision was made at some point to do leases, and that's a done deal, but you don't have to obligate the taxpayers to a schedule of payments that just doesn't make any sense.
No, I think that's great that, I mean, we have an opportunity to save money as you've presented it. So it just popped into my head as we were talking about this, and I'm adding those numbers, and I'm like, wait, that's one. That's not even both. And so thank you for
President
giving me
Reese.
your rough guess. Yes, Mr. Fowler.
Just to excuse the interruption, I got the exact number, so I was a little bit off, but it's actually the actual square footage for each middle school, and they're identical, 140,502 square feet.
So what would the total be?
A little bit more than 120. So
So
the space for the middle schools is about 120, and then the space where the preschools are is about 20,000. So that's 140,502 square feet for each
And
facility.
what would that cost at 200 a square foot?
I'm going to do math.
So we're, yeah, so 26 million, let's round
Yeah.
up, or
Wow.
ish. You can put an ish on a millions, so,
Yeah.
Yep.
And
So-
I think that if you really worked at, bidding and some other things, you could probably get that down to close to 20, depending upon what you wanted to do. But I mean, that's the ballpark or the neighborhood you would be in back in 2013.
okay. Just as a comparison based on where we're at.
President Reese,
President Reese, oh, sorry.
we're all calling her at the same time.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that this isn't common practice to lease schools, is this, Mr. Gadd? Most people, we would just buy it with our bond money if
You
that
would-
was,
you would do
we
an
would build a
outright
school with our
purchase.
bond money, correct?
using a very low interest rate in the form of a bond to do an outright purchase.
And it's bygone now, but we can try to make it better for the future. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, that it is a savings, even though it's hard to look at it that way. Thank you.
Well,
President Reese, members of the board, one of the things that our administration began back when we started building this calendar was coming to you with, we're going to do some fact-finding and get some information. And as you know, we've been keeping you updated in status reports that we have been working with attorneys to work with the foundation here to determine if this was a possibility. And again, there's a lot of work that needs to be refined, but if it is, we felt we should explore all options when we make this decision so that we could be diligent and thoughtful with all options. What are our needs? What are our growths? We have some uniquenesses in Higley that we are going to need to financially figure out how to do. So hence, when we meet at our next board meeting on the 21st, we will go into an executive session with those attorneys, with Stiefel, so that we can ask very specific things about the option, and what could that include, and do we want to do that? Hence why we've got a new photo up there that we'll look at more closely, that is an aerial of what does Higley boundaries look like right now, so that we can make some decisions with all the information, the most up to date with what we know at this time. So fortunately, we have been working all along to get some information. We'll be able to talk to them, ask specific questions, learn more about this, figure out what more we need to know, so that we have explored every option as a district as thoroughly as possible for these decisions. And so we are summarizing a big picture here, but we will be able to go deep and into the details.
Can I ask a quick question, President?
Ms.
So did I hear you say that the 32 was negotiated, or was that never mentioned? Did I mishear that?
the lender for having built the schools, and then the leaseholder, there's an extensive agreement, a really extensive agreement, like this. And some provisions within there, if we're going to purchase outright one of the schools, requires us to know what direction you want us to pursue. Because it has provisions all over it. I mean, they're unique. And so, anyway, that's the purpose of the executive session, is to show you what those things are and ask you to help us determine where to go with that.
Eliminates my second question. Thank you.
And Mrs. Anderson, that was the principal amount. Like, when you ask if it was negotiated, that's what's the principal amount. It's what he, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically a termination of the current payment schedule and ownership of one of the schools with that 32 million, but then there are other things in there that I'm sure we're going to have to talk about with the lender, and that's where your direction is needed. It's clear what the principal amount is. We've got a schedule.
And you'll be able to work with our attorney, who has been working with their attorney, so that we can understand and determine, so what and now what.
Okay. Slide number 11. This goes back to, I don't think I'll spend any time here, it goes back to that school site that I mentioned that we might pursue. It's a 15-acre, and that would give you an adequate amount of acreage for an elementary school. And then major maintenance, you can see the categories that are anticipated to spend money on. They're pretty much those every year that you would contemplate you need money to keep up with roofing and heating and cooling and painting, et cetera. They're here. And this really is a schedule, I think, that very adequately addresses, school appearance and school maintenance and all of those things that the taxpayers would have expected us to have done automatically.
President Reese. Dr. Foley, I just had a quick question. I've read that a couple of the home builders recently are putting everything on hold because the cost has went up so high for different things. Does this play into that at all? I've heard plywood went up roughly 10 times what it was
Yeah.
before, so I don't know if this
Yes.
accounts for that, or if we need to make some contingency fund for that, and that might be more of a Dr. Fowler, but Dr.
You know what?
Foley, I'll let you pass that out.
President Reese, Vice President Wilson, yes. And you'll notice that one of the things is a contingency plan in there, because that has actually been one of the things that we've talked about, was even the purchase of land or construction, that is something that's only continued to rise. And when you're anticipating a budget today for something that you're going to construct upon 2 and 3 years down the road, you've got a placeholder, but that may not be enough. Hence, we do have that contingency identified as part of that. And obviously, we'd have to prioritize at that time if it extended upon or beyond that contingency. But that is a very excellent point and a very real, that's one of the very real things that we will deal with in this is you've got your best plan for what you will do and how you might attack that, but what the cost will be at that point is obviously an unknown.
This provides for a 20% contingency. You just do the best you can with what you think is going to happen. It could be very short. I mean, construction is simply so difficult to estimate now. It changes overnight.
And I think that we've all lived through this before, and how things ended up were very different, and now we're here again. So it's kind of funny how history repeats itself, and we'll just watch and see.
Yeah.
But good question.
And
Thank
that
you for bringing it up.
contingency ought to be adequate for some period of time, maybe a year or two. Then it may become inadequate. And there's other contingencies in here. There's 2 other ones that could come into play if you needed them to make sure that you can complete this list. And this list is really important because it's the appearance of our schools, especially in a choice environment, and it's an obligation we have, I think, to taxpayers to make sure that we're maintaining their investment. And that's what this plan needs to do.
And Mr. Gass, just to clarify, they don't have to stick to this exact dollar amount per year under the bond, correct? It's just the dollar amount for this is allocated. It's up to us how we spend it, but it's still great to see kind of a chart on how that could be done, because I think in the past, we just kind of had a dollar amount and then we just kind of plucked when we need. It wasn't so clearly stated.
Identified.
And so I appreciate the dates and a plan by the year.
Okay, moving on to slide 13. Again, this will be a program that Dr. Fowler has some details for you on the 21st, but as you can see, it's kind of categorized in a major way for additions. It's enrollment driven. Facility standards, if we find that there are needs somewhere that we need to address. Renovations, especially if we can do some renovations that would help us with more capacity, or we need some remodeling done in some spaces. That's what that's all about. And then there's also a contingency here of another 2.7 million. So that could be something we could shift easily over to the maintenance category if we needed it. And so there's plenty of opportunity to find some other funds in here to be able to accomplish whatever we thought the original plan should be. And then on the last slide, it lists for you all of the contingencies that are contained in this bond package. There's $8.7 million spread across 3 categories. It's 9.2% of the total, which seems, I think, in the scheme of things, about 10% would be, a reasonable number to have. And we have not only the 3.5 million as an overall, then you've already seen the 2.4 and you've seen the 2.7. So in addition to those 2, there is an overall contingency for every subject in here, whether it be technology or whatever, of 3.5, and so there's a total 8.7 million. So that, I think that puts you in a good place to be able to deal with whatever you might have to deal with in the future. And then the last page is a calendar. We want you to be especially aware of the due dates that we have. This is the first review of the bond this evening, and we need to hear from you if you need some more information. That's what we're here to try to provide for you over this next couple of months. The April 21st is a second review, and that also will contain that executive session where we can discuss real estate. And May 19th will be the third review, again with an executive session if necessary. It may not be, depending upon how our discussions progress with the lease, the lender. And then June 9th, that would be the date in which we would have to ask you, do you want to proceed with this package and have an election in November as a form of approving of a resolution? So I really think the packet is balanced, again, balanced to the needs the district really has long-term. I think everything, generally speaking, is addressed in here in some way if it's a really major capital expenditure that we need to do. And so, I think it's a good plan. Anyway, any questions you or the board might have, try to answer.
No, I think we're good. So thank you for the details, and that this is just our first review of it, so we have plenty of time to review and talk and come up with questions, so.
Yes, I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to explain it very simply and very detailed. That way we feel comfortable, and then the community is more understanding. Appreciate it, all the work. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, we will move on to our action items. I move that we approve the tentative, I move that we tentatively approve the proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 capital outlay budget.
Second.
Is that you? I just heard a little. All right. And Dr. Foley, just going to take a moment, because we did have questions that came up when we tentatively approved our M&O.
Have significantly received less, so this is wonderful that this year to be able to match that same percentage. And, I think we can all acknowledge that our classified 5% is a lot different for them than 5% for our certified. So the fact that we were able to get to that same number was wonderful, even though the calculation overall is in terms of budget impact, very different.
President Reese, I'm very excited to approve this tonight, tentatively, if everyone approves. This is really exciting for me to see that number be the same. I know Mr. Glover, he spoke of this a lot to make sure that we were honoring everyone when he was here at that seat, but I'm really excited to see this, and I'm just thankful, Dr. Foley, and to your whole staff that we could make it the same and we can honor those people.
And again, it's good to be Higley right now. This is a good moment for us. And I know as we continue to hear, and it breaks my heart what's happening around us, I'm just so thankful for this leadership and this board and our students and our teachers that have worked so hard this year to get where we are. So again, it's good to be Higley tonight.
Yes, very well said. And it's been very important to try and, like you said, we acknowledge 5% is not the same for each class of employee, but at least we're able to offer the same percentage. So thank you. Everyone's worked really hard. So it makes this one much better. So I appreciate that. Yes, for sure. All right, anyone else have any questions or comments? No? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. All right, for future agenda items. Oh, and Ms. Martins, if I recall when I read that, these are to go out electronically, is it tomorrow or Friday?
No, President Reese, they're going to go out electronically on Monday, April 12th. So it's a little bit different and challenging for this particular employee group because the system that we do use electronically, they typically don't access very often. So we need a little bit more time in terms of the preparation. But as I've said before, our wonderful team of HR individuals and payroll have done such a great job to where I don't know if I've said it in this arena, but I felt as though our certified contracts went out fairly smoothly in our administrative ones. So I'm crossing my fingers for the same thing here. And I think the ladies in the department would have probably argued a little differently, but I said, you know, with everything new, there's some hiccups, but overall, really great job.
Perfect, thank you. So that can be expected to be rolled out electronically come Monday. Thank you. All right, for future agenda items, we have quite a list. And anything we want to add? I'm sure we'll, after our retreat on Saturday, there'll be some other different focuses, I think. So. All right, so we'll leave this as it is. And with that, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Have a good evening.